The first one I lost was a 7-year-old boy named Marcus, and he died holding my hand. That detail matters because it's the reason I stayed. Not courage, not duty, not some noble idea about what a nurse is supposed to be when the world falls apart. A child squeezed my fingers so hard, the knuckle cracked. And something inside me fused to that moment, like scar tissue over a burn. You don't walk away after that. You don't pack a bag and join the convoy heading south. You stay, because leaving would mean the last thing he felt was your hand pulling away. My name is Lena Marsh. I was 34 years old, a registered nurse at Hargrove Memorial Hospital in Cedar Falls, Iowa. And when the evacuation order came through on the morning of October 11th, I had been awake for 19 consecutive hours. I remember the exact count because I'd been tracking it the way you track contractions. Each hour a little sharper, a little closer to something you can't take back. The hospital had been filling since the 8th. First came the bites. Dog bites, people said. Animal attacks. The ER processed them like any other Saturday night trauma. Irrigate, debride, tetanus booster, discharge. Dr. Alan Garrett, who'd been the attending physician on the second floor for 11 years, signed off on a dozen of those charts himself. I watched him do it with steady hands and a calm voice. The same calm voice he used when telling families their father didn't make it through surgery. Alan had this way of inhabiting composure, like it was a physical structure, like he'd built it out of concrete and rebar and lived inside it. By the 9th, they started coming back. The discharged patients, not all of them, but enough. The first one I recognized was a woman named Deborah Kowalski. Mid-50s, heavy-set, came in originally with a bite on her left forearm. I'd cleaned the wound myself. 3 neat puncture marks, deep but not arterial. She'd told me her neighbor's dog had gotten loose. She'd been embarrassed, more than scared. I gave her ibuprofen and told her to keep it dry. Deborah came back through the ER doors at 2 in the morning on October 9th. And she wasn't embarrassed anymore. She wasn't anything anymore. The woman who shuffled through those doors had skin the color of wet cement. Her eyes tracked movement the way a security camera pans across a parking lot. Mechanical, locked, stripped of everything that makes looking at someone a human act. She walked past the intake desk without stopping. She walked past 2 orderlies who called her name. She walked straight into the triage area where a 22-year-old nursing student named Priya Anand was taking vitals on another patient. Priya screamed. I heard it from the second floor, through a closed stairwell door, over the hum of the HVAC system. That scream had a texture to it. A sound like that doesn't travel through air. It travels through the walls, through the bones of the building. I was at Marcus's bedside. He'd been admitted the night before with a fever and a bite on his shin from another child at school. A classmate who'd bitten 3 kids before a teacher pulled him off. And I looked at the door, and I knew. I didn't know what I knew. But the body understood before the brain did. By the time security restrained Deborah, she'd bitten Priya on the shoulder and the forearm. Priya sat on the floor, shaking, pressing gauze to the wounds, repeating, "I'm okay, I'm okay, I'm okay," like a prayer she was trying to will into truth. Alan stitched her up. His hands were still steady. His voice was still calm. But I saw his eyes when he thought no one was watching. And the concrete had started to crack. Over the next 24 hours, the hospital transformed. The emergency department stopped discharging bite patients. The county health board issued a statement. Paragraphs of nothing. Bureaucratic fog designed to fill space where answers should have been. The National Guard set up a checkpoint on Route 218 but waved through every ambulance. More patients arrived. Then the staff started leaving. First the ones with families, then the ones with fear. I didn't blame any of them. You can't hold someone to an oath they took in a world that no longer exists. By the morning of the 11th, when the formal evacuation order finally came, delivered by a guardsman who couldn't have been older than 20, his rifle trembling against his hip. Hargrove Memorial's second floor had 41 patients, 6 nurses, 2 physicians, 1 janitor named Walt Driscoll, who refused to leave because his wife had died in room 214 3 years ago, and a pharmacist named June Yoon, who said she'd go when the drugs ran out and not a minute before. The first floor had been sealed. We'd pushed gurneys and filing cabinets against the stairwell doors after what happened in the ER the night before. What happened in the ER the night before was this. Priya turned. And Marcus was watching me with eyes too large for his face, and his hand was in mine, and the bones of his fingers were so small I could feel each one individually, like holding a bundle of dry sticks. And his fever was 104.6. And he said, "Are the sick people going to come up here?" I said no. I said we were safe. I said I would stay right here. His hand squeezed, and my knuckle cracked, and the convoy left without me. The hours after the evacuation reshaped us into something we hadn't agreed to become. Alan called a meeting in the nurses' station at noon. The fluorescent lights buzzed with that particular frequency that makes everything feel like a waiting room for bad news. There were 10 of us total. Alan stood at the whiteboard, the one we normally used for patient assignments, and wrote 3 words: patients, supplies, exits. "We have 41 patients," he said. 14 are ambulatory. 9 are on IV medication that requires refrigeration. 6 are children. He capped the marker. The backup generator has fuel for approximately 96 hours. After that, we lose the pharmacy refrigeration unit, the ventilators, and the lights. June Yoon leaned against the doorframe with her arms crossed. She was 41, Korean American, precise in a way that made some people mistake her for cold. She wasn't cold. She was efficient. And she'd learned early that softness costs time. And time was now a currency we were hemorrhaging. "Antibiotics won't matter if the barricade on the east stairwell fails," she said. "I counted the filing cabinets. There are 4. I could move them by myself." "That's the concern," said a voice from the hallway. Walt Driscoll stepped into the doorway behind June. He was 59, built like a man who'd spent decades moving heavy things from one place to another, which is exactly what he'd done. His face had the weathered patience of someone who'd made peace with the fact that the world rarely improved, but could sometimes be maintained. He held a fire axe in one hand, resting the head against the floor like a cane. "3rd floor's clear," he said. Checked every room, locked the roof access from inside, and pocketed the key. He set a ring of keys on the counter. But that east stairwell, the door's warped. Frame's been shifted since the water damage last spring. You put weight against it, the latch doesn't catch. Alan looked at him. "Can you fix it?" "I can brace it. Give me an hour and some 2x4s from the maintenance closet on 3. "Do it." Walt left without another word. I watched him go. This man who had no medical reason to be here, no professional obligation, who stayed because room 214 still smelled like his wife's hand lotion if you stood in the right corner. And that was enough. The rest of us divided responsibilities. Alan would manage triage and medical decisions. June controlled the pharmacy. Every pill, every vial, every milligram accounted for. 2 nurses, Rebecca Lyle and Sophia Duarte, took the ambulatory patients and organized them into the west wing, away from the stairwells. Rebecca was 28, a travel nurse from Tennessee who'd only been at Hargrove for 3 weeks. She had a steel-trap memory and a habit of narrating her actions under her breath, a tic she'd developed in nursing school that she never shook. Sophia was older, 50, had worked the overnight shift for so long she moved through dim hallways like water through a pipe. Fluid, sure, instinctive. I stayed with the children, 6 of them, ranging from Marcus at 7 to a 14-year-old girl named Danielle who had a compound fracture in her left leg and an attitude that could strip paint. Danielle had been hit by a car 3 days before the outbreak. A real injury in a world that was about to make real injuries an afterthought. Her mother had been with her until the evacuation. She'd left on the convoy with the promise that she'd come back with help. "She's not coming back," Danielle told me 2 hours after the last truck disappeared. She said it without self-pity. She said it like she was reading a weather forecast. "You don't know that," I said. "I know what a promise sounds like when someone's already decided to break it." I didn't argue. You learn, in pediatric care, that children don't need you to fix the truth. They need you to stop pretending it's something else. The other children were quieter. A pair of siblings, Eli, 9, and Noah, 11, had been admitted together after their school reported both with high fevers. Their mother was unreachable. They sat on adjacent beds and communicated in a private language of glances and small gestures that excluded the rest of the world with the efficiency of a locked door. There was a 4-year-old girl named B, who had stopped speaking entirely after her father was taken to the first floor 2 days ago and never returned. And there was Thomas, 12, a diabetic whose insulin supply was the first item June circled on her inventory list. Marcus was the sickest. His fever held at 104 despite acetaminophen, and the bite on his shin had developed a dark margin, a ring of discoloration that spread like ink through wet paper. I changed his bandage every 4 hours. Each time, the margin was wider. Each time, his grip on my hand was weaker. Alan found me at Marcus's bedside that evening. The sun had set, and the backup generator hummed its low electric hymn through the floor. He pulled a chair beside me and sat down heavily. The way people sit when standing has become a decision rather than a default. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly, "and I need you to hear it as a clinician." "Say it." "Every bite patient we've tracked has turned within 72 hours. Priya turned in 36. The variable seems to be body mass and immune response." He paused. Marcus was bitten on October 7th. I did the math. It had already been over 90 hours. "He should have turned by now," I said. "Yes. But his fever could be the infection fighting for territory it can't hold. Or it could be something else. I don't know. No one knows." Alan leaned forward. His elbows rested on his knees. The concrete was cracking faster now. "But I need you to understand that if he turns, it will happen fast, and you'll be the one in the room." I looked at Marcus. His chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven waves. His eyelids fluttered with whatever dreams a 7-year-old has in a hospital bed at the end of the world. "I'll be the one in the room," I said. Alan nodded. He put his hand on my shoulder, briefly, firmly, and then he left. I sat with Marcus and listened to the building breathe around us. Somewhere below, behind the barricade of filing cabinets and gurneys, something moved. A sound like a palm dragged across metal. Slow, patient. The dead had nowhere else to be. The first barricade failed at 4 in the morning. Not the east stairwell. Walt's bracing held. It was the service elevator. We'd overlooked it because it hadn't functioned in months, stuck between floors with an out-of-order sign taped to the doors that everyone had stopped seeing the way you stopped seeing wallpaper. But the shaft was still open, and the infected don't need a working elevator. They need a vertical space and the absence of anything resembling self-preservation. Rebecca heard it first. She was doing her overnight round in the East Corridor, narrating her steps the way she always did. Checking room 208, IV bag at 60%, patient stable. When she stopped mid-sentence and stood motionless in the hallway, she told me later that what she heard wasn't footsteps. It was a sound like wet rope being pulled through a tight hole. Friction without rhythm. Something climbing that didn't know how to climb but was doing it anyway through sheer broken persistence. She came to the nurse's station at a run, barefoot because she'd taken her shoes off to let a blister breathe. And she said 2 words. Elevator shaft. Walt was asleep in the maintenance closet on the 3rd floor. Sophia woke him. Alan was in the on-call room. I was at Marcus's bedside, always at Marcus's bedside, a fixed point in a rotating disaster. And I heard Rebecca's voice and stood up so fast the chair hit the wall behind me. We converged on the elevator doors at the end of the 2nd floor hallway. The doors were closed, but the sound was unmistakable now. Scraping. Breathing that wasn't breathing. Air moving through damaged airways, mechanical and wet. And beneath it, the creak of the cable housing as weight shifted inside the shaft. How far down? Alan whispered. Walt pressed his ear to the door. He held up a hand, listened. Then he stepped back and said, 1 floor, maybe less. There's more than one. June arrived carrying a bag of saline and a roll of surgical tape, because she'd been mid-task and June never set things down unfinished. She assessed the situation in 2 seconds. We can't block these doors from the outside. They slide. We need to disable the opening mechanism. The manual release is inside the housing, Walt said. He pointed to a panel above the doors. I can pull the linkage rod. Without it, the doors can't open, even if something pushes from inside. Do it now, Alan said. Walt pulled a stepladder from a supply closet and climbed up. His hands worked inside the panel with the calm precision of someone who had repaired this exact mechanism 100 times. The scraping inside the shaft grew louder. Whatever was climbing was getting closer. I could hear the cable vibrate. A low, tonal hum like a plucked bass string. 90 seconds. That's how long it took. 90 seconds of Walt's hands inside a panel while something dead pulled itself up a cable toward a door that stood between it and 41 living people. Rebecca gripped my arm hard enough to leave bruises I'd find the next day. Sophia stood behind Walt, with a fire extinguisher raised like a weapon. Her face set in an expression I'd never seen on her before. Not fear, but the thing that replaces fear when fear becomes unsustainable. Walt pulled the rod free. A steel bar, 18 inches long, greased black. He climbed down and held it up. Doors won't open now, not from either side. The scraping continued. Then something hit the doors from the inside. A single, heavy impact that made the metal bow inward by a centimeter. We all stepped back. Another impact. The doors held. The frame held. But the sound that came through the gap was the worst part. A moan that had no emotion in it, no pain, no anger. Just the mechanical output of air forced through a throat that no longer served a living purpose. We stood there for a full minute, listening. Then Alan said, "We need to check every access point, every vent, every maintenance hatch, every window. Tonight." We spent the next 3 hours mapping the 2nd floor's vulnerabilities. Walt and I took the west wing. Sophia and Rebecca took the east. Alan and June audited the pharmacy and supply rooms. What we found was not reassuring. The second floor of Hargrove Memorial had been designed for patient comfort and staff efficiency, not defense. There were 14 windows, all sealed but single pane. 2 stairwell doors, now braced. The disabled elevator. A laundry chute that connected to the basement. 3 ventilation ducts large enough for a child to crawl through, or something that had once been a child. Walt welded the laundry chute shut using a maintenance torch and a piece of sheet metal. The sound echoed through the floor like a scream, and 2 patients woke up crying. I went to them. I said what nurses say. I said it's okay. I said you're safe. The words tasted like copper. When I returned to Marcus, his fever had dropped. 102.1. His eyes were open. I heard banging, he said. Walt was fixing something. Is it the sick people? I sat on the edge of his bed. The bite on his shin was visible beneath the bandage. The dark margin had stopped spreading. It hadn't receded, but it hadn't grown. Alan's theory hung in the air between us like a held breath. Marcus, how do you feel? Hungry? I almost laughed. The middle of everything, the dead climbing elevator shafts, the barricades, the dwindling generator fuel, a 7-year-old boy was hungry. I went to the break room and found a package of peanut butter crackers and a juice box. He ate them with the focused intensity of a child who hasn't eaten in a day, crumbs falling on the sheets, and for 90 seconds, the world was just a kid eating crackers. Then the power flickered. Just once. A stutter in the lights, a hiccup in the generator's rhythm. But June's head snapped up from across the hall, and I saw her look at the pharmacy refrigerator the way a mother looks at a crib monitor that's gone silent. 96 hours, she said to no one. That's what he said. It's been 22. The generator was burning fuel faster than Alan had estimated. The math was changing, and with it, everything we'd planned. Day 3 introduced the variable none of us had accounted for, the living. They arrived at dawn, not from the stairwells, but from the roof. Walt had locked the roof access door, but he hadn't considered the fire escape on the building's north face. A rusted ladder that ran from ground level to the roof line, technically decommissioned. Officially removed from building schematics 2 years ago when the county inspector cited it as a liability. It was still there. Bureaucracy doesn't dismantle things. It just stops acknowledging them. I heard the footsteps above us first. Boots on gravel. Human boots. Human weight. The infected moved differently. I'd already internalized the distinction without realizing it. The living planted their feet. The dead dragged theirs. Walt and Alan went up through the 3rd floor. I heard voices. Raised, then lowered, then raised again. And 20 minutes later, Alan descended with 3 new people. The first was a man named Carter Briggs, mid-40s, wearing a hunting jacket and carrying a compound bow with no arrows. He'd used the last one on Route 218. His face had the raw, abraded look of someone who'd been outdoors for days without sleep. Skin tight over cheekbones, eyes recessed and restless. He shook hands with a grip that communicated something specific. I am someone who survives. Remember that. Behind him came a woman, his wife Donna. She was younger, late 30s, and she held the hand of a girl who couldn't have been older than 6. The girl's name was Lily, and she had Carter's eyes and Dana's silence. Dana hadn't spoken since they climbed the fire escape. Carter explained this without embarrassment or concern, as if his wife's muteness were a weather condition, present, acknowledged, not subject to negotiation. We were at the Milford shelter, Carter said. He sat in the nurse's station and drank water from a paper cup while Alan and I listened. National Guard set it up at the high school. 300 people, maybe more. Cots in the gymnasium, MREs, the whole setup. It held for 2 days. What happened? Alan asked. Someone inside turned. A man who'd been bitten before he arrived. Hid it under a jacket. By the time they figured it out, he'd gotten into the crowd during lights out. 4 people bitten in their sleep. Guard tried to contain it. Quarantined the bitten in the locker room. Carter paused, set down the cup. They didn't turn at the same rate. One went in hours, the others took longer. The guards were watching the fast one when the slow ones turned behind them. He described what followed in short, factual sentences that refused to carry emotion. The gymnasium collapsing into chaos. The exits jammed with bodies. Gunfire that stopped too soon. He'd gotten Dana and Lily through a window. They'd been moving on foot since, avoiding roads, sleeping in cars. Hargrove Memorial was the first building they'd seen with lights on. I watched Dana as Carter spoke. She sat in a plastic chair with Lily in her lap, and her hands moved constantly, smoothing Lily's hair, adjusting her collar, brushing invisible dust from her shoulders. The hands were doing what the voice couldn't. They were saying, "I'm still here. I'm still your mother. The world is ending, and my hands still work." The arrival of Carter's family introduced immediate tension. Not from Carter himself, though his survival-first posture set every one of my instincts on alert, but from the resource calculus his presence demanded. June pulled Alan aside within the hour. I was close enough to hear. 3 more mouths, one of them a child who'll need dedicated supervision. We have food for the current census for roughly 8 days if we ration carefully. Add 3 people, and that drops to 6.5. The generator math is already wrong. The fuel consumption is 20% higher than projected because the compressor on the pharmacy unit is cycling too frequently. We have maybe 60 hours of power left, not 96. "I'm not turning away a family with a child," Alan said. "I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to acknowledge what it costs." That was June. She never argued against compassion. She simply insisted you look at its price tag before you bought it. I respected her for it, even when it made my stomach clench. Compassion without accounting is just sentiment. And sentiment doesn't keep ventilators running. Carter integrated himself quickly, too quickly for comfort. Within hours, he'd surveyed the barricades, questioned Walt about structural weak points, and appointed himself to a security role no one had offered him. He moved through the ward with proprietary attention, checking sight lines, testing door handles, evaluating the patients with a gaze that sorted them into categories I didn't want to name. I found him in the hallway outside the children's ward that afternoon, studying the door. "6 kids in there?" he asked. "Yes." "The boy with the bite, the one with the fever?" My pulse shifted. "Marcus. What about him?" "Your doctor says he should have turned by now, but hasn't. What does that mean?" "It means we don't know enough about what's happening to predict anything." Carter looked at me. His eyes had that restless quality, scanning, processing, filing information into a survival calculus that ran on different moral software than mine. "In Milford," he said. "The man who started it all. He hid his bite. Everyone trusted him because he seemed fine, seemed healthy. By the time they realized, it was too late. He let the sentence hang. I have a daughter in this building. And I have 6 children in that room. None of them are a threat. Not yet." He walked away. I stood in the hallway and felt the first crack in something I hadn't realized I was building. A belief that the living, at least, could be trusted to protect each other. The generator failed on the evening of day 4, not gradually, not with the dignified decline of a machine winding down. It seized, a grinding metallic scream from the basement that shuddered through the building's skeleton and then stopped, leaving silence so sudden it felt like a physical impact. The lights died. The hum that had become our baseline, our sonic floor, vanished, and what replaced it was the rawest sound in the world. Nothing. Then the pharmacy refrigerator alarm began to beep. June was already moving. I heard her feet in the corridor, fast and precise. June didn't run. She simply walked at a speed that outpaced most people's sprints. And by the time I reached the pharmacy, she had a flashlight between her teeth and both hands inside the refrigeration unit, pulling vials and lining them on the counter with the focused urgency of a surgeon in a collapsing OR. "Temperature's already climbing," she said around the flashlight. "Insulin's viable for 28 days at room temperature. The immunosuppressants for Mrs. Park in 211 are good for maybe 72 hours. The antibiotics are more resilient." She closed the fridge. "But that's not the real problem." "The ventilators," I said. "2 patients on mechanical ventilation. Room 203 and room 209. Without power, you have minutes." I was already running. Room 203 held Gerald Pratt, 71, end-stage COPD, who had been living on the ventilator for 3 days and whose lungs could not sustain independent breathing for more than a few minutes. Room 209 held Caroline Vasquez, 44, post-surgical, recovering from a spinal procedure that had been completed 2 hours before the world ended. Her diaphragm temporarily paralyzed from the anesthesia complications. I reached Gerald first. The ventilator was dead. His chest wasn't moving. Sophia was already there. She'd been closer, and she had a bag valve mask over his face, manually pumping air into his lungs with a rhythmic, practiced compression. Her arms would tire. We both knew it. Manual ventilation is sustainable for minutes, not hours. "Get Alan," she said. Alan came. He stood in the doorway of room 203 with a flashlight and looked at Gerald and then at Sophia's hands. And I watched him perform the calculation that no medical school prepares you for. The one where you weigh one life against the energy required to sustain it and the lives that energy could serve instead. "How long can we maintain manual ventilation?" he asked. "With rotation, maybe 12 hours, I said. "But that's 2 people committed full time to each patient. 4 people out of 10, doing nothing else." Alan closed his eyes, opened them. "Caroline has a chance of recovery. Her diaphragm function could return within days." He paused. The silence in that pause was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. "Gerald does not." No one spoke. Gerald's chest rose and fell under Sophia's hands. Artificial life, pumped in by human labor, each breath a decision made and remade 60 times a minute. "We don't stop," Sophia said. Her voice was iron. "We rotate and we don't stop." "Sophia, I said we don't stop." Alan looked at me. I looked at Gerald. He was unconscious, had been for most of the day, and his face in the flashlight beam was peaceful in the way that only truly sick people can be peaceful. A body so far past struggle that stillness becomes its own kind of mercy. 12 hours, Alan said finally. "We rotate every 30 minutes. If nothing changes, power, his condition, anything, we revisit." Sophia nodded once and kept pumping. I went to room 209. Rebecca was already there, bagging Caroline, narrating under her breath. "Squeeze, release. 1, 2, 3, squeeze, release." I relieved her. The mask was warm from her hands. Caroline's eyes were open, wide with the specific terror of a person who cannot breathe and knows exactly why. I held her gaze while I pumped. "You're okay," I said. "I'm here, I'm breathing for you, and I'm not going to stop." The hours that followed were the longest of my life. And I say that knowing what was still coming. We rotated between Gerald and Caroline in 30-minute shifts, arms burning, shoulders seizing, the mechanical repetition of squeeze, release becoming a meditation, a prayer, a punishment. Walt rigged flashlights to IV poles so we could see. June rationed the battery-powered equipment with surgical precision. 1 flashlight per corridor, 1 in the pharmacy, 1 at each barricade. Carter volunteered for Gerald's rotation. I didn't expect that. He showed up at midnight and took the bag from a trembling Rebecca and pumped with the steady, metronomic rhythm of someone accustomed to physical endurance. He didn't speak. He just worked. And for those 30 minutes, I revised my assessment of him by a fraction. Not enough to erase the way he'd looked at Marcus, but enough to acknowledge that people are never just one thing. At 6 in the morning, Gerald's heart stopped. Sophia was on rotation. She felt it before the monitor, which was dead anyway, could have told her. The quality of the air changed, she said later. The resistance in the bag shifted. She started compressions immediately. Alan came. They worked on him for 20 minutes in the dark, in a powerless hospital, surrounded by the dead below and the dying around them. And then Alan said, "Time of death, 6:23 a.m. And Sophia walked into the supply closet and closed the door, and no one disturbed her for an hour. Gerald Pratt, 71, retired postal worker, Vietnam veteran, liked crossword puzzles in ink because, he told me once, pencils are for people who are afraid to commit. I wrapped him in a sheet and Walt carried him to a room at the far end of the hall. We locked the door. We didn't say why. We both knew. On the 5th day, Marcus sat up and asked for a book. I was changing his bandage. The dark margin had retreated. Actually retreated, a ring of healthy pink tissue advancing where the black had been. And he simply pushed himself upright and said, "Do you have any books? I'm bored." I stared at him. 5 days of fever. 5 days of watching that wound with the certainty that I was monitoring a countdown. And here he was, lucid, hungry, bored. His eyes were clear. His temperature was 99.1. I found him a water-stained copy of Charlotte's Web from the waiting room. He opened it to a random page and started reading aloud, slowly, finger-tracking the lines. And the sound of a child reading in that silent, powerless ward was so jarringly normal that Rebecca stopped in the hallway and pressed her hand to her mouth. Alan drew blood. We had no way to run labs, no power, no equipment. But he drew it anyway and stored the vial in June's precisely organized pharmacy, labeled and dated, because Alan believed in data even when there was no infrastructure to process it. "He's the only bite patient who hasn't turned," Alan said. We were in the hallway, speaking low. Out of every case I've documented, here, from the reports before communications went down, the longest delay was 52 hours. Marcus is at 168. What does that mean? It could mean his immune system fought it off. It could mean he's carrying it in a dormant state. It could mean nothing. He rubbed his face. I need a lab. I need equipment. I need the infrastructure of a functioning civilization. And instead I have a flashlight and a stethoscope. What do? We watch him, we protect him, and we hope that whatever's different about his biology matters. That word, hope, sounded foreign in Alan's mouth. He was a man who dealt in probabilities and evidence. Hope was a concept he'd left at the door of medical school. But here it was, forced back into his vocabulary by a 7-year-old boy reading Charlotte's Web in the dark. Carter had been listening. I didn't realize it until I turned and saw him leaning against the wall 10 feet away, arms crossed, face unreadable. He didn't say anything. He just pushed off the wall and walked toward the barricade. But the look he gave Alan before he turned, the look he gave the hallway leading to Marcus's room, carried a weight I couldn't parse. Calculation, possibility, something that lived in the space between protection and exploitation. Dana spoke that afternoon, her first words in 5 days. I was in the break room with Lily, who had attached herself to me with the gravitational force of a child who senses safety and clings to it. We were drawing. I'd found a box of markers in a desk drawer, and Lily was creating elaborate, colorful landscapes that bore no resemblance to the world outside. Green fields, yellow suns, houses with chimneys that produced curling purple smoke, the architecture of a reality she was building to replace the one that had collapsed. Dana appeared in the doorway. She watched us for a moment, and then she said, "He wants to leave." I looked up. "Carter?" "He's been talking to your janitor about the fire escape, about vehicles in the parking lot." She sat down across from me. Her voice was thin, atrophied from disuse, but steady. "He wants to take Lily and go. He thinks there's a military zone in Des Moines." "Des Moines is 60 miles away. On foot through—" "I know," I told him. "He said staying here is waiting to die." "What do you think?" Dana looked at Lily's drawing, the purple smoke, the green fields. "I think Lily sleeps through the night here. She hasn't slept through the night since the school fell. I think this building has walls and people and someone who sits with children and reads to them." She looked at me. "I think leaving would kill us faster than staying." "Then stay." "It's not that simple. Carter doesn't stay in places. He moves through them. He's always been like that, even before. Always the next job, the next town, the next plan. Stillness terrifies him more than anything out there." I understood something then about Carter Briggs. His restlessness wasn't courage. It was a phobia of helplessness dressed in the clothes of action. Moving felt like control. Staying felt like surrender. And a man who can't distinguish between patience and defeat will eventually sacrifice both. "I'll talk to Alan," I said. "We need to have a real conversation about what happens next. All of us. Not just Carter making plans in corridors." Dana nodded. Her hand reached across the table and covered Lily's, gently without interrupting the drawing. Lily didn't look up. The purple smoke kept curling. That night, Danielle called me to her bed. Her fracture was healing poorly. Without imaging, we were guessing at alignment. And the pain had been escalating despite the medication. She lay with her jaws set, 14 years old, holding the pain at arm's length through sheer stubbornness. "I need to tell you something," she said. "I'm listening." "Thomas hasn't been taking his insulin." I went cold. "What?" "He's been palming the injections, pretending to dose and then squirting the insulin into his sheets. I've been watching him for 2 days." "Why would he?" "Because he heard the pharmacist lady talking about how there isn't enough. He's rationing himself, so there's more for everyone else." Danielle's eyes were hard and bright. "He's 12. He's going to put himself in a diabetic coma trying to be a hero." I found Thomas in his bed, awake, staring at the ceiling. His blood sugar, when I checked it, was 340, dangerously high. I sat beside him and administered his dose myself, watching the needle enter skin. And he didn't resist. He just turned his face to the wall. "You can't do that," I said quietly. There's not enough for everyone. There's enough for you. For how long? I didn't answer. He already knew. We both did. The math was the math. And a 12-year-old boy had run the numbers and decided to subtract himself from the equation before anyone else could. I stayed with him until he fell asleep. Then I went to the supply closet and sat on the floor in the dark and pressed my palms against my eyes until I saw colors, and I let myself have 90 seconds of the thing I couldn't afford. The suffocating, chest-crushing weight of being responsible for children in a world that had decided children were expendable. 90 seconds. Then I stood up and went back to work. Day 7 brought rain, and the rain brought new sounds from below. Water found the fractures in Hargrove's aging infrastructure, the hairline cracks in the foundation, the gaps around window frames, the seams in the roof that maintenance had patched with caulk and optimism. It pooled in the first-floor corridors and the basement, and the infected responded to it. We could hear them, not the usual shuffling, and the occasional impact against a barricade. This was different. Movement, agitation, a restless, wet churning, like something was stirring in a drain. Walt pressed his ear to the floor in the east corridor and listened for a long time. When he stood up, his face had changed. "There's more of them," he said. "A lot more." "From where?" I asked. "Rain drives them inside, same as any animal. They came in through the ground floor. Doors are gone down there, we knew that. The ER entrance has been open since the first night." He wiped his hands on his coveralls. "I'd estimate 20 or 30 based on the sound. Maybe more. 20 or 30. Below us. Separated by a floor, 2 braced stairwell doors, a welded laundry chute, and a disabled elevator. The arithmetic of survival had been running in the background of my mind since day 1, and now the numbers lurched. Alan convened another meeting. This time, it felt different. Day 1's meeting had been organizational. Tasks, assignments, the comforting framework of competence. Day 7's meeting was a reckoning. We gathered in the nurses' station. Flashlights pooled on the counter, casting overlapping circles of light that made our faces look sculpted, dramatic, like a painting of something historic. Carter stood in the back with his arms crossed. Dana sat with Lily in the hallway just outside, close enough to hear. Walt leaned against the whiteboard. June stood precisely where she always stood, in the doorframe, half in and half out, as if maintaining the option to leave at all times. "Here's where we are," Alan said. He didn't use the whiteboard this time. He spoke from memory, and the absence of the marker, the absence of the written word, made everything feel less like a plan and more like a confession. Generators dead. No prospect of fuel. We have food for 4 days at current ration. Water is stable. The building's tank system is gravity-fed and full. Medical supplies are adequate for maintenance, but not for any new trauma. The barricades are holding, but the population below us has increased significantly. And the fire escape is our only viable exit. "Then we use it," Carter said. "And go where?" Rebecca asked. "Des Moines, the military corridor. There are broadcasts." "There were broadcasts," June corrected. 5 days ago, on frequencies that have been silent since day 3. We have no confirmation that any organized military presence still exists within 100 miles. We have no confirmation that it doesn't. That's not how you make decisions about the lives of 40 people. 41, I said. Everyone looked at me. 41 patients, plus the 10 of us, plus the Briggs family. 54 people. The number landed in the room like a stone in still water. 54. We'd been thinking in abstractions, patients, staff, survivors. and abstractions are manageable. A number is not. We can't move 54 people down a fire escape and 60 miles through open terrain, Sophia said. She'd been quiet since Gerald, quieter than usual, which was already very quiet. Half the patients can't walk. 3 are bedridden. Danielle has a broken leg. Thomas needs regular insulin. Marcus is 7. Marcus is the priority, Carter said. The room shifted. I felt it, a tectonic adjustment in the emotional geography of the space. Everyone turned to Carter. What do you mean? Alan asked carefully. The boy's immune, or resistant, or whatever the word is. That matters. If there's anyone out there still doing research, still trying to understand this thing, that boy's blood is the most valuable resource in this building. More valuable than the food. More valuable than the drugs. Carter uncrossed his arms and leaned forward. I'm not saying we leave everyone else behind. I'm saying if we have to choose, and we might, we protect whatever is happening inside that kid. Silence. The rain hammered the windows. Below us, the dead stirred in the water. We're not making that choice, I said. We're not ranking lives. You already are. You just don't want to say it out loud. When the ventilator died, you chose Caroline over Gerald. That was a ranking. That was medicine. Triage. It's not the same as... It's exactly the same. You had limited resources, and you allocated them based on who had the best chance. I'm suggesting we do the same thing now, but with a bigger lens. Alan held up a hand. Enough. We're not abandoning patients. We're not ranking lives. What we are going to do is develop a contingency for evacuation that accounts for everyone. He looked at Carter. Everyone. Carter shrugged, but the conversation had done its damage. The idea was in the room now. Triage on a human scale, sorting the living the way the outbreak had sorted the dead. And ideas, once spoken, don't get unspoken. They just wait. That night, the east stairwell door began to move. Not the door itself, the frame. Walt's bracing held the door shut, but the 2x4s were anchored to a frame that was anchored to a wall, and the wall was plaster over aging studs. The infected below had found the stairwell, and they were pushing. Not intelligently, not strategically, just constant, mindless pressure. Body after body pressing forward because forward was where the sound was, where the warmth was, where the living breathed and moved and existed. Walt discovered it during his midnight check. The plaster around the frame had cracked in a spiderweb pattern, and one of the 2x4s had shifted a 1/4 inch. He reinforced it with a second layer of bracing, angling the lumber against the opposite wall of the corridor to create a compression system. The door pushing inward, the braces pushing back, the opposite wall acting as a buttress. It'll hold, he told me, standing back to assess his work. For now. How long is for now? Depends on how many are pushing and how patient they are. He paused. They're very patient. They're dead, Walt. They're not patient. They don't have a strategy. No, but they don't get tired either, and plaster does. He was right. I stood at the stairwell door and listened. The pressure was constant, a low, grinding creak, like the building itself was groaning. And through the door, the sound of bodies. Not individual bodies, a mass, a compression of former people packed into a stairwell, pressing upward because up was where the living were. I went to check on the children. They were asleep, all except Danielle, who lay in her bed with her eyes open and her jaw set against the pane. The door's going to break, she said. Walt reinforced it. I can hear the wall cracking. I've been listening for an hour. The intervals between cracks are getting shorter. It's like contractions. She looked at me. My mom was a midwife before she switched to marketing. She used to time everything. She said the body has rhythms, and if you listen, you can predict what's coming. Danielle's eyes were ancient in her young face. Something's coming. I sat with her, adjusted her splint, gave her half a dose of the acetaminophen we were rationing. If the door breaks, she said, you need to get the kids up to 3. The hallway on 3 is narrower, easier to block, and the roof access is right there. How do you know about the roof access? I asked your janitor. Day 2. I've been mapping this floor in my head since my mom left. Exit routes, choke points, supply locations. She shifted on the bed, wincing. I can't run, Lena. I know that. My leg won't let me. So I need to know where you'll run. And I need to know you won't waste time trying to carry me. Danielle, promise me. If it comes to it, you get the kids who can move and you go. I'll be fine. I'll lock the door. I'll wait. I'm not promising that. Then you're not being honest. And I'd rather have honest than nice. She turned her face to the wall, and I sat there with the weight of a 14-year-old girl's clarity pressing down on me like earth on a coffin. She was right. If the stairwell broke, I couldn't carry her. The compound fracture made her immobile. And immobility in a crisis is a death sentence that arrives disguised as bad luck. But promising to leave a child, any child, was a contract I couldn't sign. Not because it was wrong, but because signing it would turn me into someone who could. And I needed to not be that person for a little while longer. I went to Alan. He was in the on-call room, not sleeping. I hadn't seen him sleep in 2 days, but sitting in the dark, staring at a wall he couldn't see. We need to move to the 3rd floor, I said. Tonight. The patients. We move who we can. The ambulatory patients go first, then the children. Then we figure out the rest. I sat across from him. Alan, the east stairwell is failing. Danielle can hear it. I can hear it. We have hours, not days. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I've been thinking about what Carter said. About Marcus? About triage, about ranking. He's wrong in the way he frames it, transactional, cold. But the underlying question isn't wrong. Alan leaned forward. If we can only save some of the people in this building, how do we choose? We don't choose. We save who we can reach. That's a choice, Lena. Proximity as a selection criterion is still a criterion. I didn't have an answer for that. I still don't. Start the move, he said. I'll talk to Sophia and Rebecca. June handles the pharmacy transfer. Walt manages the physical relocation. He stood up. And Lena, bring the recorder. What recorder? June has a portable digital recorder in her bag. She's been documenting the pharmacy inventory on it. I want you to start recording. Everything. What we've done, what we've seen, what's happening to Marcus. He paused in the doorway. If none of us make it out, that recording is the only evidence that we were here and that we tried. I found June. She gave me the recorder. Small, silver, the size of a cigarette lighter, with a battery life of 40 hours. I held it in my palm and felt its weight, so slight for something that would eventually carry so much. I pressed record. We moved 41 patients up 1 flight of stairs in the dark, and it took 4 hours and cost us everything we had left. The logistics alone should have been impossible. 14 ambulatory patients went first, guided by flashlight in groups of 3. Sophia leading them through the third-floor corridor to rooms that hadn't been occupied in months and smelled of dust and disuse. Rebecca took the next tier. Patients who could walk with assistance, leaning on arms and shoulders, slow processions that turned a single flight of stairs into an expedition. Then came the ones who couldn't walk. Walt built a stretcher from a gurney mattress and IV poles, lashing them together with surgical tape and bedsheet strips. He and Carter carried the first bedridden patient, Mrs. Park, 68, 87 pounds, small enough that the improvised stretcher barely sagged. And the sound of their footsteps on the stairs was metronomic and steady, a rhythm that became the heartbeat of the evacuation. I carried Bea. She was 4 and weighed almost nothing, and she wrapped her arms around my neck and pressed her face into my shoulder and didn't make a sound. Her silence wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of a child who had learned that sound attracts things that hurt you. 4 years old, and she'd already internalized the survival mathematics of a hunted animal. Eli and Noah went with Rebecca, holding hands, their private language of glances operating at full frequency. Thomas walked on his own, insulin kit in a backpack June had packed for him, his jaw set with the determination of a 12-year-old who had tried to erase himself from the equation and been told he mattered anyway. Marcus walked beside me, slowly, still weak, but upright, his hand in mine, Charlotte's web tucked under his other arm. Danielle was the problem. Her fracture made the stairs impossible without a stretcher, and the stretcher required 2 carriers, and the stairwell from the 2nd to the 3rd floor was narrow, angled, and dark. Walton Carter took her. I went ahead with a flashlight, clearing the path, and Alan followed behind, ready to catch if anything shifted. Halfway up, we heard the east stairwell door give. Not all at once. A progressive failure. A crack, then a groan, then a splintering sound that traveled on through the building's structure like a fracture through bone. Then the crash. Wood and plaster and metal, and behind it, the sound of bodies pouring through an opening like water through a breached dam. "Move," Alan said. Just the one word. Not shouted. Spoken with the flat authority of a man who had used up his capacity for panic and arrived at something colder. Walt and Carter accelerated. Danielle gripped the edges of the stretcher and made no sound, not because she wasn't afraid, but because she'd already decided that her fear was less important than their footing. They reached the 3rd floor. I pulled them through the stairwell door. Alan came through last, and Walt slammed the door shut and began bracing it with furniture from the nearest room. A desk, a filing cabinet, a heavy wooden bookshelf that must have weighed 200 pounds, and that Walt moved with the adrenaline-fueled strength of a man defending the last door that mattered. Below us, on the 2nd floor, the infected spilled through the broken stairwell and into the corridors we'd occupied an hour before. I could hear them, moving through the rooms where we'd slept, where Marcus had read his book, where Gerald had died and Sophia had grieved, and Thomas had tried to sacrifice himself. They were filling the space we'd made human with their empty, mechanical persistence. Everyone was accounted for. I counted heads 3 times in the 3rd floor corridor, flashlights sweeping faces, patients, children, staff. 54, all present. The 3rd floor was smaller than the 2nd. Fewer rooms, narrower hallways. Danielle had been right about that. The choke point worked in our favor. Only one stairwell door to defend, one corridor to monitor. But the space was tighter, the air closer, the sense of compression immediate. June established a new pharmacy station in what had been an administrative office. Walt secured the stairwell door with the same bracing technique, doubled. Carter posted himself at the corridor's far end, near the roof access. And I realized he wasn't guarding us from what was below. He was guarding the exit, ensuring it remained available. For him, the recorder became my confessional. I started using it that first night on the 3rd floor, sitting in the stairwell between the barricade and the corridor, speaking low enough that the patients wouldn't hear. I didn't plan what I said. I just talked. I talked about Marcus, about the bite that should have killed him and didn't, about Alan's theory that something in his biology had fought the infection to a standstill. I described the dark margins retreat, the fever's decline, the clear eyes and the hunger and the boredom, symptoms of recovery in a world where recovery from a bite didn't exist. I talked about the patients, about Mrs. Park, who asked me every morning if her daughter had called, about the man in room 304 who had been a music teacher and who hummed Debussy while I changed his bandages, about Caroline, whose diaphragm function had partially returned. She could breathe independently for increasing intervals, each breath a small revolution against the machine that had been breathing for her. I talked about the children, about Eli and Noah's silent language, about B's drawings, which had started to include dark shapes at the edges, smudges of black marker that encroached on the green fields and yellow suns like a weather front moving in, about Thomas, who took his insulin now without protest, but who watched June count the vials each morning with the eyes of someone calculating a countdown, about Danielle, who had become the ward's unofficial strategist, mapping the 3rd floor from her bed, asking Walt questions about load-bearing walls and ventilation systems, building blueprints in her mind because her body couldn't build anything else. And I talked about the sounds. The 3rd floor was closer to the roof, and at night, when the rain stopped and the wind shifted, you could hear things outside, not just the infected, though they were there, a constant low-frequency presence, like tinnitus for the soul. Other sounds, distant, mechanical, engines maybe, or generators, or the rumble of something heavy moving on a road far away. Sounds that could have been rescue, or could have been the infrastructure of civilization collapsing one machine at a time. I recorded for 15 minutes that first night, then 20 the next, then 30. The recorder became the only place I could say things I couldn't say to patients, to children, to Alan, to anyone whose composure depended on mine. I told it about the fear, about the guilt of surviving when Gerald hadn't, about the creeping, corrosive doubt that staying had been the right decision, that I hadn't chosen courage. I'd chosen a slower death surrounded by people who trusted me to save them. On the 9th day, I recorded this. Marcus drew a picture today. He drew the hospital. He drew people in the windows. He drew himself on the roof. And in the drawing, he was waving at something in the sky. I asked him what he was waving at. He said, "The people who are coming to get us." I didn't ask how he knew people were coming. I didn't correct him, because I realized I needed him to believe it more than he needed me to confirm it. His certainty is the only fuel I have left. Alan listened to parts of the recording on day 10. I hadn't intended to share it, but he found me recording in the corridor and asked to hear what I documented about Marcus. I played him the clinical sections, the bite progression, the fever data, the behavioral observations. He listened with his eyes closed, nodding at intervals. And when it was done, he said something I didn't expect. "You should record everything, not just Marcus, all of it. The decisions we've made, the ones we got wrong, the people we couldn't save." He opened his eyes. This recording might be the most important thing any of us do here. More important than the medicine. More important than the barricades. Why? Because medicine and barricades are local. They protect the people in this building. That recording protects the knowledge. If Marcus is immune, truly immune, then what's in his blood could matter to millions of people. And if we don't survive to deliver him to someone who can study it, that recording is the only chain of custody for the information. Chain of custody. A legal term, a term for evidence, for proof, for the scaffolding that connects an observation to a conclusion. Alan was thinking beyond our survival. He was thinking about what our survival, or our failure, would mean to whoever came next. Record everything, he said again, and keep that recorder on your person at all times. I did. Day 11. Carter made his move. It was 3 in the morning, and I was on watch at the barricade. The 3rd floor was asleep, or performing the approximation of sleep that passed for rest in our compressed, airless world. Walt was dozing in a chair near the roof access. June was in the pharmacy office with the door closed. The children were in the large room at the corridor's end, sleeping in a cluster of pushed-together beds, a defensive formation they'd arranged themselves into without adult instruction. Bodies close, warmth shared, vulnerability minimized. I heard Carter's footsteps before I saw him. He moved quietly, but not quietly enough. He came down the corridor carrying a backpack I hadn't seen before. One of the emergency kits from the supply room, restocked with food, water purification tablets, a first aid kit, and flashlight batteries. Dana followed him, holding Lily against her shoulder, the child asleep and draped over her mother like a garment. They stopped when they saw me. "Don't," I said. Carter's face hardened. "We're leaving. Tonight. I've rigged a rope on the fire escape. The bottom section is collapsed. But I can lower Dana and Lily to the ground. It's clear on the north side. I've been watching." "You've been watching from the roof? At night? With no lights?" "I used moonlight and patience. The north parking lot is empty. The infected are concentrated around the south and east entrances. That's where the noise was. That's where they went. The north is clear." "And then what? You walk 60 miles in the dark with a 6-year-old? "I walk until I find a vehicle. There are cars in the lot. Keys might be in the building, in purses and jacket pockets on the 1st floor. The 1st floor is full of them, Carter." "I know. I'll go fast." Dana stood behind him, and her face was the face of a woman caught between 2 terrors. The terror of staying and the terror of following a man whose survival instinct had hardened into something that no longer accounted for odds. "Dana," I said, "you don't have to go." Carter stepped between us. "She's my wife. Lily's my daughter. This is our decision." "Is it?" "Because Donna told me she wanted to stay." The corridor went very still. Carter looked at Dana. She didn't look back. "Things change," Carter said slowly. "We've been here 11 days. Help isn't coming. The food's almost gone. The building is surrounded. Every day we wait, the odds get worse. Marcus is getting better. Alan thinks. I know what Alan thinks. Alan thinks a 7-year-old's blood is going to save the world. Maybe it will. But that's not my problem. My problem is getting my family out alive." He moved past me. I didn't block him. I didn't have the right. He wasn't a prisoner. This wasn't a command structure. And whatever authority I'd accumulated was moral, not physical. He was a free man making a choice, and the choice was to leave. But then he stopped. He was at the supply room door. He opened it, and he started loading a second backpack. "That's communal supply," I said. "There's enough." "There's not. You know there's not. June's inventory. June's inventory accounts for 54 people. Tomorrow there'll be 51. The math works. You're taking food from sick people, from children." Carter turned, and in the flashlight beam, his face was stripped of everything civilized. Not cruel, I don't think Carter was cruel, but reduced, pared down to the animal arithmetic of survival. Me, mine, now, out. I'm taking what my family needs, he said. I'm sorry. Walt's voice came from behind me, low and even, carrying the specific weight of a man who has picked up a fire axe and shifted its balance in his grip. Put the food back, son. Carter looked past me. Walt stood at the far end of the corridor, axe resting on his shoulder, not threatening, just present. A statement of mass and consequence. You want to leave? Leave, Walt said. Take your pack, take your family. I'll open the roof access and wish you well. But you leave the communal supply. Every can, every packet, every tablet. The standoff lasted 15 seconds. 15 seconds of two men measuring each other across a dark corridor while the dead moved below and the living slept around them. Then Carter pulled his hand from the supply room and closed the door. He left with his original pack. Dana followed. Lily slept through all of it. Walt opened the roof access. Carter went through first, tested the fire escape, rigged his rope. The last I saw of him was his silhouette on the roof line, backlit by a sky that had cleared for the first time in days, stars visible above a world that had forgotten to look up. Dana paused at the roof access door. She looked back at me. If the military is in Des Moines, she said, I'll send them here. Okay, I mean it. I know. She went through the door. Walt closed it, locked it. Think they'll make it? I asked. Walt considered this the way he considered all things, slowly, thoroughly, with the patience of a man who measured twice. I think Carter will, he said, and I think he'll hate himself for how. Day 14. The food was gone. The barricade was failing. And Marcus told me something I couldn't explain. It started at dawn, or what passed for dawn, inside a building where we'd covered the windows with sheets to avoid attracting the dead. Marcus came to me in the corridor, where I was sitting against the wall, recorder in hand, documenting what I expected to be one of our final days. He sat beside me, cross-legged, Charlotte's Web in his lap, and he said, "They're going to stop." "Who's going to stop?" "The sick people. They're tired." I looked at him. His face was calm, not serene. 7-year-olds don't do serenity. But calm in the way of someone reporting a fact so obvious it barely needs stating. "Marcus, what do you mean?" "I can feel them." He tapped his shin, where the bite scar was now a silvery circle of healed tissue. "In here. It's like hearing a radio station really far away. They're not angry. They're just stuck. And they're getting tired." I should have dismissed it. Should have patted his head and told him not to worry. But Alan had taught me to document everything. And something in Marcus's voice, the matter-of-fact certainty, the total absence of performance, made me press record. "Tell me more about what you feel," I said. "It's hard to explain. It's not like hearing with my ears. It's more like when you know someone's behind you, even when you can't see them. I know they're down there. I know how many. And I know they're slower than yesterday." I brought Alan. Marcus repeated everything. Alan listened with the expression of a scientist who has been handed data that demolishes his framework and is trying to decide whether to mourn the framework or celebrate the data. "You're saying you have some kind of awareness of the infected," Alan said. "Through the bite, through whatever's in your blood." "I guess so." "And you're saying they're weakening. They're running out, like a battery. The ones in the building, they haven't eaten in a long time. They're still moving, but it's slower, weaker." Alan and I exchanged a look. The implications were staggering and unverifiable. A child claiming to sense the infected through a biological connection forged by the very pathogen that turned everyone else. It was impossible. It was exactly the kind of thing you'd hear in the last days of a desperate siege, when hope manufactures miracles to fill the space where reason has collapsed. But Marcus's bite had healed. His fever had broken. He was alive when every data point said he shouldn't be. The impossible had already happened once. "I'm recording this," I told Alan. "Good." That afternoon, the second stairwell door, the one Walt had braced on the third floor, began to show stress fractures in the surrounding wall. The same pattern as before. Spiderweb cracks in the plaster, the slow migration of the frame under constant pressure. Walt reinforced it again, but his face told me what his words didn't. We were running out of walls. June came to me in the evening with the final inventory. She read it without inflection, the way she read everything. Numbers don't have feelings. And neither did June when she was working. 0 caloric stores. Water for 2 days from the tank, possibly 3 if we restrict to drinking only. Insulin for Thomas, 4 doses. Antibiotics, adequate. Painkillers for Danielle. 12 hours at current dosage. She closed her notebook. That's it. And the patients. 3 have deteriorated significantly without nutrition. Mrs. Park is declining. She's been refusing water since yesterday. The music teacher's wounds are infected, and without surgical intervention, sepsis is likely within 48 hours. June's voice was steady, but her hands, the hands that counted every milligram, that organized every vial, were still. Deliberately still. "Lena, I need to say something I haven't said to anyone." "Say it." "We can't save them all. We probably can't save most of them. And the ones we can save, the children, the ambulatory patients, the ones with a chance. They need us functioning. They need us making decisions based on reality, not obligation." She looked at me. "I stayed because the drugs were here, and drugs need a pharmacist. The drugs are almost gone. My reason for staying is almost gone, but I'm still here, and I need a new reason." "The recording," I said. "What?" "Alan says the recording is the most important thing we do. Everything about Marcus. Everything about what happened here. If we can get it out, to anyone, anywhere, it matters. That's your new reason. Help me make sure this information survives, even if we don't." June considered this. The calculus ran behind her eyes. Costs, benefits, probabilities. Then she nodded once. "I have a backup battery in my bag. 12 additional hours of recording time. It's yours." She handed me the battery and walked back to the pharmacy. At the doorway, she stopped. "For the record," she said, "I think Marcus is telling the truth. About feeling them. About them weakening." A pause. "I have no evidence for that belief. It's the first decision I've made in this building based on something other than data. I wanted to document that." She disappeared into the office. I held the battery and felt its weight. So small, like the recorder. Like the vial of Marcus's blood. Like the hand of a 7-year-old boy. Everything that mattered was small. Everything that could save the world fit in a pocket. On the 15th morning, we heard the helicopters. Not the imagined ones. Not the phantom sounds we'd been straining to hear every night for 2 weeks. The auditory hallucinations born of desperation that evaporate the moment you hold your breath and listen honestly. These were real. Distant but real. The unmistakable thrum of rotors beating air into submission, coming from the south, getting louder. Walt heard them first. He'd been on the roof, checking the fire escape, and he came through the door moving faster than I'd seen him move in 2 weeks. "2 birds," he said. "Military, south of the river. maybe 4 miles out. The effect on the building was electric. Patients who hadn't spoken in days lifted their heads. Rebecca grabbed a sheet and ran for the roof. She was going to wave it, signal them, scream if she had to. Sophia followed her. June began packing the pharmacy essentials into a single bag with the controlled urgency of someone who had rehearsed this moment in her mind. I grabbed the recorder. I grabbed Marcus. I grabbed the vial of his blood from June's bag. "Everyone to the roof," Alan said. "Now, everyone who can move." The evacuation was chaos controlled by practice. We'd moved up one floor in the dark. Moving up one more to the roof in daylight was almost elegant by comparison. The ambulatory patients went first, guided by Sophia and Rebecca. Walt carried Danielle on his back. She gripped his shoulders and didn't make a sound. Her jaw locked, her eyes fixed forward. I carried B again. Marcus walked beside me, holding Thomas's hand, because somewhere in the last 2 weeks, those two had formed a bond I hadn't fully noticed. The 7-year-old who shouldn't be alive, and the 12-year-old who'd tried not to be. The bedridden patients couldn't make the roof. We knew this. I knew this. There was no stretcher, no time, no strength left for carrying people up a narrow industrial staircase, while helicopters that might not circle back moved through the sky. Alan didn't come to the roof. He stayed on the 3rd floor with the patients who couldn't move. I realized this when I reached the rooftop and turned to look for him, and he wasn't there. I went back to the stairwell door. He was standing on the landing, hands in his coat pockets, looking up at me. "Alan, come on. 8 patients can't be moved. They need a doctor. They need you alive. You can't do anything for them that..." "Lena, go." His voice was the concrete again, rebuilt. The cracks filled, the structure restored, standing there on the landing of a doomed building, with his hands in his pockets like a man waiting for a bus. "I'll keep them comfortable," he said. "I'll keep the door locked. And if the barricade fails, I'll make sure it's fast and painless. That's what a doctor does." "Alan." "The recorder. Do you have it?" "Yes." "The blood sample?" "Yes." "Then everything I need to be on that roof is already there." He smiled. The first smile I'd seen from him since October 8th. It was tired and real. "Go, Lena. Wave down those helicopters. Get Marcus to someone with a lab, and make sure they hear the recording." I stood on the landing, and I looked at him. And the recording was running. It was always running now. I'd stopped turning it off. And everything I felt compressed into a single syllable that I couldn't speak. He turned and walked back into the 3rd floor. The door closed. I heard the lock engage. The roof was chaos and hope. Rebecca was waving a white sheet like a flag of surrender, which is exactly what it was. Surrender to the possibility of rescue, which is the most dangerous kind of hope because it has somewhere to fall from. Walt had set a fire in a metal trash can. Thick black smoke rising against the pale sky, a signal visible for miles. The helicopters turned. They turned toward us. 2 Black Hawks, military markings, moving with the purposeful trajectory of machines that have been given coordinates and are following them. They'd received a signal. Someone had told them we were here. The first helicopter landed on the roof. The downdraft was enormous. Sheets of grit and debris, noise so complete it became a physical environment. A world made entirely of sound and wind. A soldier jumped out, young, armored, weapon slung across his chest, and he shouted something I couldn't hear. Then a second figure emerged from the helicopter. A woman, civilian clothes, moving with urgency. Danielle screamed. The woman was her mother. She'd gone on the convoy. She'd reached the military zone. She'd spent 2 weeks fighting through military bureaucracy, civilian panic, and the collapse of organized infrastructure to convince someone, anyone, to go back for a hospital that probably didn't have survivors. She reached Danielle and they collided on that rooftop with a force that had nothing to do with physics and everything to do with 2 weeks of a broken promise mending itself in real time. The soldiers began loading patients. Efficient, practiced. They'd done this before, not here, but somewhere. This was a protocol. Triage, stabilize, transport. The machine of civilization, battered and diminished, was still turning. I gave the first soldier the vial of Marcus's blood and the recorder. I told him what they were. I told him to get them to whoever was still doing research. He looked at me with the eyes of a 23-year-old who had seen too much to be surprised by anything. And he nodded. Marcus was next aboard. I lifted him into the helicopter and buckled his harness, and he looked at me with those eyes, too large for his face, clear, calm. And he said, "I told you they were coming." I pressed my forehead against his and held it there for 3 seconds. 3 seconds of stillness in the middle of the rotor wash. Then I pulled back and helped B, Eli, Noah, Thomas onto the helicopter, Rebecca, Sophia, June, Walt, who had to be physically pushed toward the door because he kept looking back at the building like he was leaving a person, not a place. I was the last aboard. I stood on the roof of Hargrove Memorial, and I looked down at the building that had been my world for 15 days. Through the windows, on the floors below, I could see them moving. The infected, still there, still patient, but slower. Marcus was right. They were running out. The helicopter banked south over Cedar Falls, and I saw what the city had become. I'm not going to describe it in detail. There are things the eyes record that the mouth should not repeat. I'll say this. The infrastructure was broken. Roads blocked. Buildings burned. The geometry of civilization, the grid of streets, the order of addresses, the assumption that a house is followed by a house is followed by a house, was scrambled, rearranged by something that didn't build, only consumed. But there were pockets, clusters of light in the early morning, smoke from cooking fires, not destruction, signs of organization, barricades that had held, neighborhoods that had pulled inward and survived. The world wasn't gone. It was wounded and hiding, breathing shallowly, waiting. We landed at a forward operating base 40 miles south. Military tents, generators, the organized chaos of an emergency that had graduated from acute to chronic. Medical teams met the helicopters. Marcus was separated from me immediately, taken to a field lab where people in biosafety equipment were waiting with the readiness of scientists who had been told something impossible was coming. I didn't fight it. I let them take him because that was the whole point. Marcus in a lab, his blood under a microscope. Whatever was different about him, isolated and studied and possibly turned into something that could stop this. The soldiers processed the rest of us. Triage, hydration, nutrition, basic medical assessment. I sat on a cot in a medical tent, and a young medic handed me an MRE, and I stared at it for a long time before I opened it, because the concept of food that was simply available, not inventoried, not rationed, not weighed against the number of mouths remaining, was so foreign that my hands didn't know what to do. I ate. It tasted like salt and chemicals and salvation. June found me an hour later. She sat beside me on the cot and said nothing for a while, which was how June communicated most of her important feelings, through the decision to be present rather than the effort to speak. "They're analyzing the blood," she said finally. I spoke to the lead researcher. She says the preliminary markers are consistent with a natural resistance, not immunity, resistance, His body didn't kill the pathogen. It negotiated with it. Negotiated? Her word. She said it's like his immune system found a frequency the pathogen could accept. A truce at the cellular level. June shook her head slightly. I don't understand the mechanism. But she was excited. Not hopeful, excited. There's a difference. Hope is what you feel when you don't have data. Excitement is what you feel when you do. I looked across the base. Soldiers moved between tents. A radio crackled. Somewhere in a lab I couldn't see, a 7-year-old boy's blood was being studied by people who still believed science could outrun catastrophe. June, I said, thank you for the battery, for the recorder, for staying. She looked at me, and for the first time in 15 days, something shifted in her expression. A crack in the efficiency, a momentary dissolution of the system she'd built to keep the feelings at bay. Don't thank me, she said. I stayed because the math required it, that's all. Is it? She stood up, adjusted her jacket, straightened the cuffs. No, she said quietly. It's not. But the math is the part I can explain. And explaining the rest would require me to be a different kind of person. And I don't know how to be that person yet. So let's leave it at the math. She walked away. I watched her go, this woman who had counted every milligram, who had rationed hope with the same precision she rationed morphine, who had made a choice based on something other than data for the first time in her life and was still trying to reconcile the ledger. I pressed record one final time. This is Lena Marsh, registered nurse, Hargrove Memorial Hospital, Cedar Falls, Iowa. Day 15. I'm recording this from a military forward operating base, approximately 40 miles south of Cedar Falls. I don't know the exact location. It doesn't matter. What matters is this. A 7-year-old boy named Marcus survived a bite that should have killed him. His blood contained something. Resistance, immunity, a negotiation between his biology and the pathogen that the researchers here believe could matter. I don't know if it will lead to a cure. I don't know if the word cure even applies to what's happened to the world, but it's a start. We lost people. Gerald Pratt, the patients on the 3rd floor, Alan Garrett, who stayed behind because he believed a doctor's place is with the people who can't be moved. I don't know if he's alive. I'm choosing not to know yet because knowing would require me to feel something I can't afford to feel while there's still work to do. Carter Briggs and his family left on day 11. I don't know if they reached Des Moines. I don't know if Des Moines is anything worth reaching anymore. What I know is this. I stayed because a child held my hand and I couldn't pull away. That's not courage. That's not duty. That's the thing that happens when a human connection gets made at the exact wrong moment and becomes permanent. A scar that holds you in place. Marcus is in the lab. The recorder is almost out of battery. There are 40 hours of testimony on this device. Medical observations, survival decisions. The sounds of a building holding and breaking and holding again. Someone will listen to it. Someone will use it. I don't know what happens next. I don't need to. I stayed, and it mattered. That's enough for now.